Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, May the 2nd, 2024. So the thumbnail on this video looks like a full moon, but actually it's not a full moon, it's Pluto. And Pluto today goes stationary retrograde. It comes to a standstill. Of course, this is geocentric Pluto. We look at the planets from the perspective of the Earth usually, although recently I've tried to look at the heliocentric positions as well. So Pluto coming to a standstill is important. And I think it was the astrologer Stephen Arroyo. I think I read one of his books I think it was him, I may be wrong, but I read one of his books in the 1980s, and he described what it meant for a planet to be retrograde, and he used the analogy of a candle flame. So you can, if you take your finger and you pass it through a candle flame, you're not going to burn yourself if you just quickly go through the candle flame. Well, that's the idea of a planet that's moving. But when a planet is stationary, it's like your finger stops in the candle flame, and of course it burns. Your finger burns, that is. And so when a planet goes retrograde, stationary retrograde or stationary direct, it really is very important. And so in this video I want to really consider what it means for Pluto to be stationary retrograde, and also I want to consider its retrograde motion briefly over the next few months and sort of track it through. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, May the 2nd, 2024. So here are the positions of the planets set for New York, May the 2nd, 2024 at noon. Just remember that there's nothing special about New York. I've just gone for New York as a point of convenience. And you can see that in New York at noon, the moon is at 28, I think that's 28:18 Aquarius. In other words, the moon is on the verge of leaving the sign Aquarius. And in fact, the moon moves into Pisces at, I make it 7:52 in the evening London time. So New York time, it would move into Pisces at 2:52 p.m., just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you're in Los Angeles or the West Coast of America, then that would be 11:52 a.m., which would be just before noon. So if you're in the Americas, certainly there's going to be a big chunk of the day when the moon is in Pisces. If you're in Europe, it's really going to be in the evening. If you're in Asia, and certainly East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, well, the moon is going to be in Aquarius all day long. So, as is often the case with these things, it rather depends on your time zone. But, you know, with the moon moving into late Aquarius, it is in an air sign, but there is a certain feeling that things are coming to an end. We've done what we have to do. There's perhaps not much more we can achieve until the moon moves into Pisces. So if you're not in the Americas, you may find today that you've done your work and there's not really much else you can do, and it may not be a good idea for starting new projects. And perhaps part of the problem is you'll have lots of ideas, you'll be thinking things through, but maybe there just won't be the spark. It'll feel that maybe it's just a little bit too late. But don't worry, the moon is going to move into Pisces. If it doesn't move into Pisces today, it will move into Pisces tomorrow. And the moon in Pisces, it's a big change moving from Aquarius to Pisces. So, when the moon is in Aquarius, it's a time when many of us can be quite objective, and we can take a step back and not get emotionally involved, or at least believe we're not getting emotionally involved. I think some of us might try very hard not to be emotional, but it's difficult. It's difficult to really keep our feelings in a neat, compartmentalized box. Emotions are still going to manifest somehow, but when the moon goes into Pisces, it's much clearer. We are definitely in a very emotional world when that happens, and it's perhaps easier to express our feelings. And there are some aspects to consider. The moon is making a square aspect to the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So that square aspect between the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is going to be more if you're in the old world. In other words, Eurasia, Australia, New Zealand, and particularly, further east, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. But I think all of us at some point in the day are going to feel that moon square Uranus and Jupiter. There may be a feeling that we're being held back, but enough is enough. We have got to express our freedom somehow. And perhaps that's moon in Aquarius. All of us have a particular way of looking at the world, and we want our particular way of looking at the world to be expressed. And perhaps with that moon aspecting the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, it might feel that now is definitely the time to do it. And really, that's it in terms of the main astrological aspects. There are a couple of midpoints that I think are worthy of note. Yesterday I talked about Mercury being conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. And because Mercury, Venus and Mars, all three of them are quite fast movers, relatively speaking, particularly Mercury and Venus, it means that this midpoint Mercury on the Venus-Mars conjunction is going to persist for quite a few days. And what that might mean, what that will mean is that there is an emphasis on charisma and seductiveness and attractiveness. It's what I said yesterday. We can, all of us in our own way, be seductive. It depends on the situation. And we can communicate with really incredible power, but it's not the power of aggression. It's the power of just our attractiveness and being able to perhaps package a message in a way that other people like. So if you have an opportunity to do some smooth talking today, then I think it could work out very well. Another thing going on is that Venus is conjunct the Uranus node midpoint. So, what does it mean for Venus to be conjunct the Uranus node midpoint? Well, what does the node mean? I think I would take, in this instance, the German interpretation of the node, i.e. the node as it is interpreted by, for example, Reinhold Ebertin and Alfred Witter, those schools of astrology, which see the node not really in terms of karma, and they don't really even distinguish between the north and the south node, but the node is a point of contact. It's a point where we meet the world. And so if Venus is conjunct with Uranus node midpoint, then you might say, well, the Uranus node midpoint is sudden contacts, or it could be a sudden break of contact, or just you look at your whole network of contacts and consider the possibility that there might be some changes. And so with Venus conjunct the Uranus node midpoint, then expect things to happen that you really weren't expecting in terms of your network of friends, associates, all the people you know. Perhaps new people might suddenly appear quite unexpectedly, though not everyone is going to be to your liking. It's not just that the Venus is conjunct the Uranus node midpoint, but Mars is conjunct the Saturn node midpoint. So there is, where's Mars gone? Mars is here. There is Saturn, there's the node. So it is a time when Mars is on the Saturn node midpoint. And Mars might be how we assert ourselves. And Saturn node may be about not getting the feedback we want from other people. Other people just holding us back. And if we're trying to assert ourselves in ways which really depend on other people's complete support and cooperation, then it might not work out. So if we do need to assert ourselves in a perhaps dramatic way, we have to make sure that we have the resources to see it through on our own. Then there is the heliocentric positions of the planets. I just think it's just always important to look at the heliocentric solar system, even if we don't see anything particularly spectacular. And here we go. There is the Earth. Remember, in the heliocentric solar system, the Sun is in the middle. So we have to look at Earth. There's no point looking at the Moon because the Moon and the Earth are in the same place. So you can see that the Earth is now separating from a trine of Saturn. I think we're still going to feel that, a certain sense that things are contained. And, if we've got things we want to do, it may be that the world around us, indeed the solar system around us, is going to contain those things with particular emphasis on Pluto. And so that may allow us to have a certain amount of discipline. Another aspect which is starting to form, I wouldn't worry about it right now, but we should certainly be aware of it, is that Mercury, there's Mercury in at 23 Sagittarius. I know that it sounds weird for me to say Mercury is in Sagittarius when, of course, we know for sure that Mercury is in Aries. But just remember, from a heliocentric point of view, the signs change. I mean, not that I really look at the heliocentric signs particularly hard, but as I said, the Earth is in Scorpio heliocentrically, Mercury is in Sagittarius heliocentrically, and Mercury is starting to move to a square of Neptune. We may be feeling it a little bit. Mercury square Neptune may be a time when we can't always say what we mean, and we shouldn't take what people say at face value. But I wouldn't worry about it right now. We'll look at the situation tomorrow and the day after to see what Mercury is doing as it approaches that square of Mercury and that square of Neptune, and how the overall heliocentric position changes. So really today, there isn't a great deal to report, though. Well, I suppose I should say one thing. It's not immediately obvious. There is the Earth at 1244 Scorpio. There is Neptune at 2739 Pisces. So that means that the Earth and Neptune are in sesquiquadrate aspect. They're 135 degrees apart, exactly. And as far as I'm concerned, that aspect is important because it is 3/8 of the circle. Remember, if you've got a birthday cake and you cut that cake into 8 equal parts, then if you put 3 of those slices together, that's 135 degrees, 3/8 of a circle. And with the Earth sesquiquadrate Neptune, that's telling us what's going on down here on Earth. And we've just had Mars conjunct Neptune geocentrically, and we've got Neptune on Skeet, and some of those old issues may start to rear their ugly and confusing head. So Neptunian events. What is a Neptunian event? I suppose we think of anything to do with water. So that water thing that I've been talking about on and off, I think probably a lot of astrologers have been talking about water and water damage and all that, and that kind of theme. With Earth sesquiquadrate Neptune, I think it comes back into focus, and with the heliocentric solar system, we do have to focus more on the collective rather than the personal. So as far as what's going on today, there may be things going on at sea. You have to be careful if you're doing anything water-based. Probably governments have to be careful. People are talking about when is Ukraine going to try to launch its big attack to destroy the Kerch Bridge. Apparently that's what Ukraine wants to do, and it's been planning it. Everyone is saying that maybe they're going to wait until the holiday, the Victory Day celebrations. So that's a possibility. But things to do with sea, ships, navies, with Earth sesquiquadrate Neptune, that is something we have to be a bit careful about. But I think on a personal level, it probably is not something we need to worry about too much. So that's the position heliocentrically. And what I want to do now is look at what's going on for the 12 signs. So let me just go back to the geocentric coordinates, and these are my forecasts for today, for the 12 signs, for Thursday, May the 2nd, 2024. Aries. Aries, Mars is your ruler, and it's still very much at the beginning of the sign. Noon New York, it's 1:33 Aries. And so we can still say that Mars is conjunct the Aries point. It's still a time, Aries, when you really can have a big impact. And I do think that you shouldn't waste this opportunity. Yes, it's true that Mars is going to be moving through Aries for some time. I think for around 6 weeks or something like that. But you could argue that right at the beginning, when Mars crosses the Aries point, you have a special kind of power. And so, Aries, I hope that you are using this power, and you are using it in the right direction, and that you don't waste your energy. And I think there is scope for wasting your energy today. And I think the problem might be twofold. I was just talking about Mars being on the Saturn node midpoint, conjunct the Saturn node midpoint. Also the fact that the moon is in very late Aquarius. They kind of have a similar message. So let me explain that. So if the moon is in Aquarius. Now, from your view as an Aries, the moon in Aquarius, it's quite sociable, and you're going to enjoy other people's company. I mean, why not? If they're exciting, fun people, that's great. But the moon is coming to the end of Aquarius, and in the jargon, it's void of course, and indeed it leaves Aquarius, depending on your time zone. Could leave Aquarius, if you're in Los Angeles, for example, as early as noon, just before noon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand or Asia, then it's not going to leave then the moon is not going to leave Aquarius until tomorrow. But at some stage, the moon is going to leave Aquarius and move into Pisces. But before it leaves Aquarius, then there's going to be a sense that really nothing is happening. And you're thinking, well, these people, the people around you, are they any use? Can they do anything? Can they achieve anything? Can they be helpful? Are they exciting? Are they interesting? And in many cases, the answer might be no. So from a social perspective, perhaps you should have low expectations. And you could say, well, moon goes into Pisces, that's going to make things easier. You're going to be more sociable once the moon changes sign. And yes, the moon does change sign as early as noon as early as noon today if you're on the west coast of America. But then the moon moves into Pisces, and from an Aries view, the Pisces is actually quite an introspective sign, and it doesn't really fill you with a great need to go out and socialize. Indeed, perhaps the opposite. And also, Mars is conjunct the Saturn node midpoint. I've talked about that in a general sense, but I think that Mars conjunct the Saturn node midpoint may be particularly important for Aries. Yes, I think, as I said, Mars conjunct the Saturn node midpoint, I think it's going to affect everyone, but you in particular. And how I would see that is that you might have big ideas, but you can't really rely on anyone. People might have made you promises. You might think that someone is going to respond enthusiastically to your ideas and your initiatives, but I'm not convinced. I think you might be actually quite disappointed by other people's reaction. And this means, Aries, that if you want to get anything done, if you want to take any initiatives, it should be a solo effort, or at least you should expect it to be a solo effort. I'm not saying that no one is going to help. And I think that there are particular one-to-one relationships that could actually be useful. But in general, you can't expect anyone to help, and people may raise all sorts of objections, and they may just drag their feet and nothing might get done. But if you could do things on your own, then things should be fine, and you can really make things happen. And as far as one-to-one relationships are concerned, the picture may not actually be so bad, because I do think that there are certain individuals who have a sense of excitement and they are looking for variety. These individuals may be few and far between, but I'm sure there's at least one person who is able to provide the excitement you're looking for. It can help, and it can perhaps help you initiate all the things that you'd like to be initiating. So don't totally give up on humanity, but don't expect much from just groups of people. Your general contact list, don't expect much. But I think in terms of close relationships, I think it's a different picture. I think maybe it's partner, maybe it's spouse, someone you know very well. They may be in a position to be useful and constructive and perhaps even exciting. Taurus, you are in a state of mind where you might feel that your overall sense of direction is getting a bit fuzzy. You know what you want. You certainly know where you want to go, and you've tried your hardest, but you're reaching a point where maybe you're not getting much done, and in terms of the current short-term situation, it's probably likely that you've got as much as you possibly can from it. And so at this stage, you may reach a point where it's just taking you more and more effort to get fewer and fewer results. Now, I don't mean to say that in order to be negative. I'm just saying that really it's a process. It's a time of change, really, and perhaps what you need to be doing is looking at what you've gained, perhaps over the last few days, and consolidating them, and maybe not taking on brand new work, and perhaps leaving it for later. And also, Taurus, just consider why you're doing why are you doing what you're doing. Is it really giving you everything you need? And I do understand that Taurus is a fixed sign, that Taurus likes to give itself a set of goals and then just go for it. The ends justify the means, and you just keep going, and then you that's enough. But maybe that persistence needs to be questioned. And in that sense, maybe you should also consider that Pluto is going retrograde. So Pluto has been in Aquarius since, I think, January. Is it January the 19th? Something like that. And I think since January, many Taurians have been thinking hard about what they want and what kind of results they want, and perhaps how they are using their power, especially in a setting of like business and career, but it can be about your power within society. And you've been thinking hard about this, and you've been really developing a set of goals, and I think you've achieved quite a lot, and you've realized quite a lot, and you kind of feel that you know what you want. But now that Pluto is going stationary direct, there may be a time where you need to just take stock of what you have achieved and have not achieved, and also take stock of the impact you are having. Very often we can get our way, but getting our way has a cost. And maybe, Taurus, you do need to consider that cost. Maybe you have exhausted yourself. Maybe you've exhausted other people. Maybe you're simply questioning, what's the point? Is this really what you want? And I do think that today and tomorrow, certainly, you will be maybe reconsidering what you want. It's not enough just to have a set of desires and goals. That's not enough. They have to fit into some kind of wider purpose. And I think that's going to be very much on your mind. And so that raises a question of what is going to create change? Well, I think on a day-to-day level, at the moment, you are attracting interesting events and interesting people, and things might happen that you weren't expecting. And I'm not talking about bad things. I'm talking about things that simply were unplanned, and you may get access to knowledge and inspiration that makes you think again. And that means it's quite important for you to be flexible at the moment, especially when the moon moves into Pisces. Now, quite when the moon moves into Pisces, that does depend. Yeah, if you're a Californian Taurean, then moon will go into Pisces late morning. If you're an Australian Pisces, then if you're an Australian Taurean, the moon will go into Pisces tomorrow. So it does depend a bit, but the moon is going to go into Pisces, and that does give you more flexibility. You're better able to deal with things that outside your normal experience. But yeah, get ready for a bit of change. And I think that change in many cases could come from other people. You meet people who do something that you weren't expecting, who say things you weren't expecting, and hopefully they make you think. And they allow you to shift your awareness and perhaps look at your goals, or everything you've been trying to achieve, maybe since January, and look at what you've been trying to achieve, and look at your desires perhaps, and just to think again. I think that would be really terribly important. I think that would really, really help you. And as far as relationships are concerned, if that is an issue, then I think you're in a position to meet new people. So if you think that the current people you're involved with, attached to, are not giving you everything you need, then don't give up. I think there are chances, definite chances to meet new people, and that is going to be especially the case when moon moves into Pisces. Gemini, you continue to be very charismatic. I mean, after all, Mercury, your ruler, is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, it was conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint yesterday, but it's even closer to that conjunction today. So it's a time when you actually can have an impact on people. People will notice you, and they will keep noticing you. So it's therefore important that you do have a certain amount of confidence. So regardless of whatever your self-esteem is like, whether it's, if you've got low self-esteem, I don't know. Me, I'm a Gemini. I sometimes get low self-esteem. Nothing to be ashamed of. But don't underestimate yourself. And people are going to notice you. And in your own way, you can be... you can come over in quite an attractive way. Maybe not me personally, but maybe you. Appearance and that kind of thing doesn't really bother me, but... if it does, then you will know how to come over in the best possible way, and you will know how to look your best, I think, with Mercury conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So I think that is definitely good news. And also, you need to be thinking about how you can present yourself to the wider world, because I think it is important. The moon is moving from Aquarius to Pisces, and from a Gemini perspective, that part of the sky, late Aquarius, early Pisces, is really very high profile, and it's another reason why you need to really consider how you are occurring to people. And if you want something done, if you've got ambitions, now is very much the time to really get going on them. And it's not really just about today. Indeed, it may be more about tomorrow. I mean, that does depend on where you are. So if you're an Asian or an Australian Gemini, then tomorrow moon moves into Pisces, and that's going to give you a major fill-up, and it's going to really push you into the limelight. if you're in California, well, the moon moves into Pisces early. When does it move into Pisces? Late morning today, Thursday. And so if you're in California, after lunch, get going. There are things to do, and you've got to really show the world what you can offer. So overall, I think things are looking good, Gemini. But one small point I should say is that Pluto is going stationary retrograde. And it's a time when Geminis shouldn't be too sure of some of their core beliefs and ideas. Maybe since the beginning of the year you've started to feel really certain about something, maybe in a political or ideological sense. You feel that it's all making sense now. Maybe politically you know who to vote for, you know who not to vote for. On the big issues of the day, whatever they might be, climate change, environment, I don't know, some of the international issues, whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, whatever those issues might be, that you might be now currently feeling strongly about. So Gemini, think about your politics right now. And I suppose I'm not supposed to talk about politics and religion, but as you know, I like talking about politics and religion. But then I'm a Gemini talking to a Gemini, so that's okay, isn't it? So do think about all of your core beliefs and the beliefs that have been developing since January, and I think your political beliefs as well. And consider whether you're right. Maybe some of the things you believe in, you've been too quick to reach conclusions. And as a Gemini, you are flexible. And if any sign is allowed to change their mind, it's you, Gemini. Yes, it's okay to change your mind. And I think that with Pluto going stationary retrograde, a change of mind on certain core philosophical, political, or religious, spiritual issues may be something that you need to consider. Cancer, the moon is in late Aquarius, and it is making square aspects to Jupiter and Uranus. And because the moon is in late Aquarius, there is a feeling that you have done your bit. And you've seen the world, you've seen what's possible, you've seen what's not possible, and you probably feel that, there is not much more that has to be done. Though, if you are in Asia, Australia and New Zealand in particular, you may feel a square between the moon and Jupiter and Uranus. And that square between the moon and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction could really stir things up for you and make you stubborn but perplexed. By that I mean, yes, you are stubborn. You want to stick to the way you have a view of the world. You want to stick to it. You don't want to make any changes. But at the same time, you're perplexed because you're thinking, yeah, you have strong views, but are they right? Have you really got it right? Have you understood everything? And it's therefore a good idea if you don't jump to conclusions and you don't stick to a fixed position, because things are changing. The moon moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces, and I think that sign change is very fortunate from a Cancerian perspective, because Pisces is a water sign and Cancer is a water sign. And when the moon moves into Pisces, you're going to feel much more in your element, that you can sort of use your feelings in a constructive way, and you don't have to hide, and you don't have to be worried about a complicated emotional situation. So this movement into Pisces, it really depends. If you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that movement from Aquarius to Pisces is going to be tomorrow. If you're in the Americas, it's going to be late morning, early afternoon. So it kind of depends. But whenever the moon moves into Pisces, whatever time it moves into Pisces, whether it's today or tomorrow, you feel that things are getting better, things are becoming becoming less complicated, and at the same time, you're better able to engage with other people. It's going to be much easier to engage, because when the moon moves into Pisces, it starts making a trine to Venus in Taurus, and Venus is in its own sign in Taurus. So that, as far as I'm concerned, does look good. So if you're feeling that things are a little bit stuck with the moon in late Aquarius, don't worry. Things are going to get better. And yeah, if you're in California, then you've got over half the day with the moon in Pisces. So you can really take advantage of that movement. Though I suppose you do have to pay some attention to sort of deeper issues, because Pluto is going stationary retrograde today, and from your perspective, this Pluto stationary retrograde in Aquarius, it's in a sign that, from your view, it's quite a complicated sign, and things are changing and transforming at a deep level. You may feel that sort of there are tectonic shifts going on at the depths of your unconscious. You can't fully verbalize them. I think you can verbalize them to some extent, because Pluto is in Aquarius. It's an air sign, but I think you almost have an understanding at a really deep level of what's going on in the collective. And that's what the tectonic shifts are about. It's not about your tectonic shifts. It's not personal to you, but it's part of the collective and the collective unconscious that you are actually part of. And if anyone can verbalize what's, in any basic sense, what is going on in the collective, it's probably you. But you're not all there, because it is quite complicated. But it's shifts in society, shifts in the collective, and you can feel them, and you feel that things just aren't going to be the same again. And we're not talking about anything short term, what's going to happen tomorrow. We're talking about more about what's going to happen, say, next year and beyond. You can feel it. It is a little bit disturbing. It might feel more comfortable just to ignore it, turn the other way. But I would suggest you do look into the void and see what, and see, really try to see what you can feel, and even try to verbalize what you can feel. Because if you can understand the way things are shifting, I think you can not just help yourself prepare for the future, but you can perhaps help many of the people around you, including your loved ones. Leo, you are in many respects in the mood for excitement. You want excitement. And at the same time, you understand that there isn't much excitement to be had. At least if you look around you. The world in some respects seems a little bit jaded, a bit boring, and you're wondering how can that world out there really give you anything that you really want, anything that's really interesting. And that might be a bit of a concern for you. But Leo, you have to remember that you are powerful. You're always powerful because you've got Sun in Leo. I mean, the Sun rules Leo. And at the moment, there's a load of stuff in Taurus, and that's good for Leos. Taurus is a high-profile sign. And you just know deep down that however tedious and boring things are, you can actually create some changes. And it's really all about you and your personality. You have the personality to make things happen. So it should not be a time when you expect other people to do anything. Don't have any expectations, but you can have some expectations in terms of yourself, and you can also have expectations in terms of what impact you can have. So if you come across someone who seems boring and lackluster, don't necessarily give up on them. Maybe your job is to bring them out of their shell, or to create an exciting impression, and people may realize that things aren't as tedious as they seem. And so you, in many respects, can be an agent of excitement if you just give yourself a chance. And at the same time, it's just very important that you are in control, that your vision is the one that eventually wins out, because there are lots of visions, lots of imaginings going around, and a lot of these visions and imaginings are in conflict with one another. And you certainly have to be aware of that conflict, but you also have to make sure that you are able to win that conflict, or at least win the conflict maybe 75%. Maybe you're not looking at an 100% victory, and maybe there's a little bit of compromise to make, but you don't have to compromise everything. You certainly don't have to compromise the majority of what's important to you. You can perhaps give away some stuff on the edges, but fundamentally you do not have to compromise. Now, when I've been going through the signs, I've been mentioning the fact that Pluto is stationary retrograde. And I think for you, the fact that that Pluto is stationary retrograde is important. Pluto goes stationary retrograde in Aquarius, in your opposite sign. And I think that many Aquarians have been thinking that other people and their various contacts with friends, partners, associates, or anything, all those one-to-one relationships, however brief, that they're all in their own way consequential and have the capacity to transform. And with Pluto going stationary retrograde, it may be that you need to think again about a couple of people, perhaps people who have become important in your life since the beginning of the year. And when I say important, in a good and a bad way. Some people have perhaps become important in your life, and they're not people you want to have around, but maybe you have to have them around. And do consider the role of these people in your life and how they've been impacting you. And with Pluto going stationary retrograde, it may be a time actually when you need to start disempowering certain people and empowering yourself. So perhaps, Leo, you've made someone too significant and too consequential. And you need to accept, with Pluto starting to go retrograde, that they don't actually have the power that you've given them. So in many respects, if you feel that you don't have as much freedom as you'd like because someone else, or perhaps certain people in the plural, are bossing you around, are trying to control you, you may have reached a stage where you've been exaggerating. You've just given people more power than they actually have, and certainly more power than they deserve. And it's not that anything externally has to change. Your state of mind has to change. And maybe you've been just projecting your fears and insecurities onto other people, making them into things that they're not. And once you have that realization, I think, Leo, you can really give yourself a lot of freedom. Virgo. The moon is in late Aquarius and it is moving into Pisces. Quite when the moon moves into Pisces, that is a question of what your time zone is. But it's a time when you do have to consider what impact certain people can have on you, or maybe what impact they are about to have on you. And that means in many cases you have to create space, and so you have to sort of look, who are the people around you? Who are the people who you are very soon going to have some connection with? Who are they? Perhaps you need to identify with them, and you need to start making preparations. And this moon moving into Pisces, remember Pisces is your opposite sign, very much connected with relationships. When the moon moves into Pisces, it will make a sextile aspect with Venus. And so moon sextile Venus is about really being able to benefit from someone. Now, that moon sextile Venus is going to be really more about tomorrow, but you still need to be ready for it. And in that sense, some preparations might be required. And also, you should not be underestimating your ability to charm and to seduce and to attract. After all, Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury at the moment is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, yesterday it was also conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, but today that conjunction between Mercury and the Venus-Mars midpoint is even closer than it was yesterday. And I think it's going to be around, it's going to be around tomorrow. I haven't checked, but I think it might be even closer tomorrow than it is today. But really try to take advantage of it, because at the moment you are an attractive person, and at the same time you have intensity. I know that Virgo as a sign is not really known for its intensity. When one thinks of intensity, I suppose one thinks more about Scorpio. But at the moment, I think Virgos may actually have some Scorpio traits at the moment. It's temporary, but there is a certain dark seductiveness about Virgos which maybe you can take advantage of. After all, Mercury is in Aries. From a Virgo view, Aries is quite a complicated sign, and at the moment, perhaps you're coming over as a complicated but really very interesting person. So Virgo, really take advantage of it, and don't allow yourself to be sidetracked, and do make the most of your many talents. Though you should have one eye on the future, and you should remember that Pluto is stationary retrograde, and with Pluto stationary retrograde, do think about the next few months and what your plans are for the next few months. I think that as a Virgo, good organization is important, but organization can happen in many ways. It's not just about tidying things up, clearing things up. It's about having a vision about the way things should be configured. And I think probably since January, many Virgos have had this vision about the way things should be configured, and you have been trying to configure your life in a particular fashion. But with Pluto going stationary retrograde, you may start to think, hold on, is that really how things should be configured? Have you been over obsessed about the wrong things? Not in a disastrous way, but your life could perhaps be a little more efficient when you start to drop some of your obsessions about the way things should be organized. And perhaps over the next few months, you can become a little more relaxed and just make a few changes, and perhaps even reverse some changes you made. So you might have made some big organizational decisions since the new year, and when you look at them again, you're thinking, hold on, that wasn't the right thing to do. Reverse it. Nothing is set in stone at the moment. And I think with Pluto going stationary retrograde, you have an opportunity to make some changes and perhaps go back to a previous way of existing, and a way that was perhaps more comfortable. And you perhaps were too keen to give something up. And okay, some things have to be given up. So for example, if you've just given up smoking or drinking, I'm not telling you to go back to bad habits, but there may be habits which were actually, or not habits, but activities you're involved with, or ways you were doing things which were perfectly fine, but you just gave them up for no particular reason. You thought you were doing the right thing. Maybe you just gave them up because you could. But maybe that's something you do need to revisit. Libra, you are in a position where you can make things happen, and you shouldn't assume that the world as you see it is the way the world has to be. And I'm thinking particularly on a social level. As a Libra, the people around you, the people you have to deal with on a day-to-day level are really important, because Libra it's a very sociable sign. And if you just follow the line of least resistance, you just hang out with the same people in the same way, you have the same kinds of conversation, you have the same kinds of interaction. But at a certain stage, Libra, it might just get a bit boring, and you may feel that you just have to shake things up. And I think that's what you can do today. So you do not have to be satisfied with the way things are in a social sense. And you may make the decision that certain people are not useful anymore. They're not exciting, they're not interesting. You've heard everything they've got to say, and they've got nothing more to say of any interest. And then it's fine. It's fine to just distance yourself from them. You don't need to make a scene about it. Because if you want to make changes in a social sense, today, it's going to be easy. It's almost like something goes on in your mind, and then you start behaving in a different way, and as a result of your behavior, you start to see that your social world starts to reconfigure, and it's a time when you can not just distance yourself from people, but also meet new people, new excitement, new interest. And it doesn't take much. Just one initiative can launch something brand new in the sense of contacts and relationships, and also be open to the possibility of surprises, people doing things that you really weren't expecting, and not being shocked necessarily, just being happy that you're perhaps seeing a new side to someone's personality. Though I don't want to give the impression that today is all about chaos and excitement. That is not the case at all. I think there is a serious side to today, because the moon is moving out of Aquarius and into Pisces. And with this sign change, you may actually have to be more down to earth. It's about taking what you're good at, and particularly if you've been doing very well at something recently. So look at the last day or two. What have you been excelling at? What has been really working for you? And perhaps you've surprised yourself with some of your abilities and your talents. Maybe you've said to yourself, "Well, that's good. I can do it," and it's great that you've perhaps come to that realization. But the challenge now is to make it part of your daily routine. And as the moon moves from Aquarius into Pisces, certain things which maybe recently had just been a bit random have to be made permanent, and that requires a little bit of effort and streamlining. So in that department, a bit of work may be required. Maybe not today. It depends when the moon goes into Pisces. If you're in California, moon goes into Pisces this morning, late morning. If you're in Australia, it goes into Pisces tomorrow. But whenever the moon goes into Pisces, just start being ready to make something permanent. It shouldn't just be some flash in the pan ability that just comes and goes. If you're good at something, you need to be employing this talent all the time, not just at random moments. So that is something that Librans really have to consider. And I should also point out that Pluto is going stationary retrograde in Aquarius. It's in an air sign. So Pluto went into Aquarius in January, and I think overall for Librans, I think that was very fortunate, and it should have helped you really concentrate on what you're good at, and perhaps you were being challenged to have some kind of personal transformation where you could perhaps transform something that was maybe some peripheral ability that you didn't use all the time, but now you need to make it central. And with Pluto going stationary retrograde, you perhaps have to ask yourself, to what extent have you achieved it? To what extent are you using your God-given talents? Maybe give it a percentage. Are you using them 100% or 50% or 10%? I think you'll possibly reach the conclusion that you haven't been using your God-given talents as effectively as you could have been, and that perhaps your attitude needs to change a little. And so while Pluto is going retrograde, in fact, Pluto goes retrogrades for a short time later in the year out of Aquarius and into Capricorn. And so while Pluto is doing this retrograde motion, maybe you just need to reconsider some things. Ask yourself, how can you make the most of what you've been given? And if you haven't been making the most of it, and I'm thinking in some cases this is the case, that you have been underusing what you've been given, what can change? What has been preventing you from doing it? And it may well be that you are worrying too much about outside pressures. Remember, Libra is a very sociable sign, and that the challenge now is to be more independent and to put yourself first. But this is not anything short term, and I think that this will start to resolve itself really for the rest of the year. So don't get immediately worried about it. In fact, you should be quite excited about it, because if your abilities are not being used to their full, then you've got plenty to look forward to. Just imagine what it's going to be like when you are firing on all cylinders, when 100% of what you've been given is actually being used. And I think that by the end of the year, I think you can be starting to move towards that state. So yeah, there's some work to be done, Libra, but I'm confident that you can accomplish all your targets and more. Scorpio, you recently have been perhaps a little bit introspective. I don't think you've always been a fun person, life and soul of the party. Not really, not over the last couple of days. And I think you have not been entirely positive when it comes to dealing with people. I think actually you may have been quite a difficult person to deal with, and maybe there was an expectation issue. Scorpios can often have high expectations, and it does seem that some of your expectations were not being met. And when you saw people failing, you tended to just give up on them, not give them a second chance. And I think you've taken things a little bit too far. And with the moon moving out of Aquarius into Pisces, I would see a certain improvement in this direction. I think that while the moon has been in Aquarius, there has been a tendency for Scorpios to keep themselves to themselves. You haven't really wanted to interact, and I think that you find people somewhat annoying. I think today you're going to find people annoying, especially if you are in East Asia, Australia or New Zealand. Not so much if you're in the Americas. And if you do find people annoying, rather than get angry, instead consider, why is it happening? It may be that what's happening is that you're being challenged, perhaps challenged to come out of your shell and to reveal your hand. People want to see you. People want to see what you're thinking. They want to know what you're thinking. And if you are being provoked into revealing your hand, then understand the situation. If this is a provocation, then perhaps it's just time to be honest and to be open and to give people a chance to express themselves. Yeah, you might not agree with them, but you don't want to have a clash just for the sake of it. And the moon will leave Aquarius and move into Pisces at some stage. Could be late morning if you're in California, could be tomorrow if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand. But whenever the moon moves into Aquarius, that is something really to look forward to. Sorry, when the moon leaves Aquarius, that's something to be looking forward to, because the moon moves into Pisces, and Pisces is a water sign, and Scorpio is a water sign, and so Pisces has a natural connection with your sign. And it's a time when you can be a more fun person. It's a time when you can express yourself. And as you move into tomorrow, the moon in Pisces makes a sextile to Venus. And so with this moon sextile Venus, you're going to feel, I think, a lot more relaxed, and I think you're going to lose some of your rough edges. And indeed, this evening, if you're in the Americas, you may begin to feel this moon sextile Venus, and losing your rough edges, finding it easier to relate to people, and perhaps also being less judgmental. But if you're further east, don't worry. If you're in Eurasia, Australasia, it's that moon sextile Venus will just happen a bit later. So overall, Scorpio, don't take yourself too seriously, and do try to understand other people, and perhaps understand the problems that other people are grappling with, and don't be judgmental today. I think that is very important. Sagittarius, you still have quite a lot to say, and you know how to express yourself with great fervour. And I said that yesterday, and this is a reminder that, when I'm doing these forecasts of the 12 signs, it's not like every day is some discrete partitioned off unit that has its own quality. Yeah, maybe from a perspective of the I Ching, but from the astrology, we're dealing with waves. People are coming, aspects are coming in and out, they're becoming powerful, they're losing their strength, and they're gaining their strength. And Jupiter, for example, Jupiter's your ruler, is currently aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint. It was sort of aspecting a Mercury-Mars midpoint yesterday. It's still aspecting a Mercury-Mars midpoint. Mercury-Mars is about being able to express yourself with great force, with a certain amount of violence. I remember I went to 80s in the 90s. I went to this church. I don't know why I was going to this church. It was some fundamentalist. I don't know how fundamentalist was. It was just this church in South London. I think someone was going to be talking about astrology, and I sat through this entire prayer meeting, and everyone sang this song, or hymn, I don't know what they call it, but everyone was singing it, and everyone had to stand up. I wasn't singing, I was just watching. And at the end of it, the pastor or the preacher, he stood up and he said, "That was no good. That wasn't enough violence. As Christians, we're supposed to be violent." And then he said, "Well, do it all over again. I can't believe it. I've never seen that before." The pastor telling people to sing a song again, or sing a hymn again, but the previous time it wasn't violent enough. Anyway, I mean the word I mean violence in that sense. Express yourself with violence, so violent in a non-destructive kind of way. And so that's Jupiter aspecting the Mercury-Mars midpoint. Really, you feel that you need to express yourself with violence, and it's going to be hit and miss. Sometimes you're going to tell people what's on your mind and you're going to cause offense. And in other places, you're going to say what's on your mind and it'll be just what everyone wants to hear. And I do think that if you don't say what's on your mind today, you might miss your chance. So if there is something to be said, Sagittarius, then really you've got to say it. Unless it's a situation where you're going to cause offense, get yourself arrested, get yourself killed. No, well, not in those kind of situations. But if you feel that something has to be said, there may be a time limit. And when the moon leaves Aquarius and goes into Pisces, that might be the time when you have lost the moment. Or should I say, it's not going to be as easy as it used to be once the moon moves from Aquarius to Pisces, because, you know, in the Sagittarian chart, you know, Pisces is quite a low profile sign. And with the moon in Pisces, you're not going to be in the mood for fireworks. I don't think other people are going to be in the mood for fireworks, and your focus may be more on things like the family and stability, and you're not really going to want to rock the boat. So do take your chance when it comes. Now, as far as when the moon moves into Pisces, it does depend, as I've been telling everyone, sort of ad nauseam, that moon goes into Pisces late morning, early afternoon in the Americas. In Australia, it's tomorrow. So that does depend. But moon going into Pisces is quite important. And with the moon going into Pisces, I think that things are going to become a lot more stable. And that's something you're going to certainly feel if you're in California when moon goes into Pisces before lunch. And that's a time where you do need to be more relaxed, and it's not going to be the time for bold words. Another thing I should point out, Sagittarius, is that Pluto is going stationary retrograde today. And with Pluto going stationary retrograde, I think that you may need to consider how you relate to your community, to your neighbors perhaps. And when you consider your relationship with your neighbors, now neighbors, when I say neighbors, I may be talking about where you live, who lives across the corridor, who lives in the next house. It could be, if you're going into work, people you meet every day but you never talk to. Who are those neighbors? And with Pluto going stationary retrograde, it seems that there could be some change in your relationship with your neighbors, and quite a fundamental change. And perhaps over the last few months, you have developed a pattern of relating to your neighbors. And it seems a new pattern, but you're perhaps having to rethink it. And perhaps if you've got agreements with your neighbors, and there may be power issues here. So if you've been having a dispute with your neighbor, and it sort of seems to have resolved itself, or there's some uneasy balance, then with Pluto going stationary retrograde, that balance may shift, and you might not be immediately aware of what's going on, but you need to watch it, and you need to be ready to step in and perhaps take dramatic action in a sort of Pluto way. That's not about making a big fuss. The whole world watches you. It's not about that. It's about thinking things deeply and actually understanding what needs to be done and sort of envisioning how you'd like things to be. But right now, in terms of your neighborhood, your community, something is shifting. And yeah, over the next few months, probably for the rest of the year, you need to work out what's going on and perhaps change the power balance in some way. Capricorn. I think Capricorn, it would help if you were a little detached today. You don't have to be right in the center of things. You need to, I think, get a perspective. And maybe recently you've been missing that perspective. Perhaps it's just about taking things just a little too personally. But perspective, I think, would be very good. And realizing that in the grand scheme of things, there are a lot of things that just don't matter. And so when you think about things, the kind of things that have made you really annoyed and agitated in the past, when you think about them today, I think it's quite likely you're going to be telling yourself, well, actually, what is the point? Does it really matter? Because really, Capricorn, there are so many things that don't matter. And I think that today there probably isn't a great deal that really has to be done. And when you look at how other people are behaving, you may be thinking, why are they doing what they're doing? They're wasting their time. They're going nowhere. And then you realize it doesn't matter. It's not really a time for making judgments. And besides, things can change. What's true today may not be true tomorrow. So I think that is something you should bear in mind. And so as far as what's happening today, I don't think there's really much to be said. Though I can't ignore the fact that Pluto is going stationary retrograde. Now, from a longer term perspective, that Pluto retrograde is important because Pluto, I think it's now at 2 degrees 6 minutes Aquarius. I mean, I will be talking about Pluto in greater detail later in this video, but I just want to talk about it specifically for you, is that Pluto goes stationary retrograde today, and it will go backwards all the way to 2939 Capricorn. So Pluto is going to go back into Capricorn. It's going to go back into your sign in the autumn. And perhaps you need to start preparing for that. You may feel that you have just, over the last few years, maybe longer, a decade, or that you've undergone this big change or a transformation and you're now out the other side. Well, there's still a little bit of work to be done. There's something left that needs to be sorted out. And later in the year, that is something you're going to have to go back to. And today, with Pluto going stationary retrograde, I think that it's something that you're going to start to become aware of it. You also may be starting to think about money in a new way. Now, remember what I said. Today is a day not to be taking anything too seriously, for being just relaxed. Just, understanding that, in the grand scheme of things, it just doesn't matter. So when I talk about money, I'm not telling you to be worried about money today, or I'm not telling you to be worried about money at all. I'm just saying that with Pluto going stationary retrograde, it may be a time, and again, not necessarily today or even this week, but where you have to just reconsider some aspects of your finances that you may have felt that you had sorted out, that you've got to grips with, but maybe you haven't. And again, I'm not predicting disaster or anything. I'm just talking about optimization, that something is not fully optimized. And I think with Pluto going stationary retrograde, over the next few months, you can start to rework your finances and look at them again. So really, it's a longer term process. It's not just about today. And sort of by the autumn, and well, in fact, moving into, of course, autumn assumes you're in the northern hemisphere, or by the southern hemisphere, spring, depending on where you are. So by the end of the year, you can get to grips with it, get to grips with things again. And there is some small transformation, certainly relating to your finances, but also when the moon goes back into Capricorn itself, it's more about you. But just be prepared for that. But short term, just don't get too worried about it. Aquarius. Pluto is going stationary retrograde. And Pluto is in your sign, and it has been in your sign since January. So this, to my mind, could be quite important. So with Pluto going into Aquarius, overall, this is a time when Aquarians have to, or should be, reimagining themselves, recreating themselves, transforming themselves. And you may feel that this process is well underway and that you kind of are starting to understand what it's all about, where you are in terms of a power equation, where you are in terms of society, government. It all seems to be moving in a particular direction. And that's the way Aquarians like it. I mean, remember, Aquarius is a fixed sign. It does like to move in one direction. But with Pluto going retrograde, and it's retrograde until the end of the year. In fact, Pluto leaves Aquarius. You might think, oh, Pluto's in Aquarius, but actually Pluto goes back into Capricorn. It leaves your sign. Briefly, not for long. I'll talk about the timing later in the video, but of these sign changes. But some of the changes that you felt were appropriate and it was all going in the right direction need to be reconsidered. Not necessarily today, but perhaps over the next few weeks, next few months, reconsider what you've been trying to do, and you might then realize that things are perhaps a little more complicated than you'd realize. And in certain situations, it may be that you've started this process of transformation, of change. You know where you're going, and you feel you've got good foundations for it. But it may be by the end of the year, that whole process of change has to start from scratch. Don't worry about it. Pluto moves through Aquarius for a long time. You can't expect to have everything sorted out and worked out all at once. There is a sense of learning here. And so having another opportunity to change yourself, nothing is written in stone. What you've achieved and not achieved since January, that's not the end of the matter. And yeah, you have a chance to start again. And maybe it's just the right thing to do. But I'm not really talking about what's going on today. I'm sort of reminding you that Pluto is retrograde. Today is when it happens. And it's perhaps over the next few weeks and months that you're going to understand the full implications of it. But short term, I wouldn't worry too much about anything. Um, I mean, okay, I understand some things do have to be worried about, but I would just take it easy today. I don't think that there's very much that can be achieved today, especially if you're in Eurasia, Australasia. I think you've done your work in most cases, and you shouldn't feel that you're under any great pressure. If you're in the Americas, it's a slightly different situation because the moon is leaving Aquarius and moving into Pisces. If you're on the west coast, moon moves into Pisces late morning. If you're on the east coast of America, then it will be sort of early mid-afternoon. And so with the moon moving out of Aquarius, you may find that some of your priorities start to change. Some Aquarians might find themselves being concerned about money. I don't think in a particularly major way, and not just concerned about money, but in a negative way, but concerned about money in terms of how to make more money, how to improve your financial situation. And when the moon moves into Pisces, after all, it makes a sextile aspect to Venus. And that can be quite reassuring in a financial sense. Although whenever you see Moon-Venus aspects, you always have to flash, over expenditure, luxury items, that kind of thing. But it can work both ways. Moon sextile Venus is not just about spending too much money. It can actually be about making money, and it can be about finding ways to make money. And so American Aquarians, look at your finances and look at what you'd like to be earning, and look at the ways you can make some money. And I think there are ways in which you can do something useful in a financial sense. But if you're not in the Americas, don't feel jealous about that, because the moon will make that sextile to Venus tomorrow. So you haven't missed out on anything. Pisces. Soon enough, the moon is going to enter your sign. When the moon enters your sign, well, it's all about time zones, isn't it? If you're in the Americas, then the moon will enter Pisces late morning or early afternoon. If you're in New Zealand, then the moon will enter Pisces tomorrow. But sooner or later, whether it's today or tomorrow, the moon is going to enter Pisces. And I think that is a good thing. I think it's nice when the moon is in Pisces, if you're a Pisces, because you feel more comfortable. You feel that you are in your element, that you're able to express yourself emotionally. And at the same time, you can express yourself in general, regardless actually of whether the moon is in Pisces or the previous sign of Aquarius, because Jupiter rules Pisces. It's not Neptune. Jupiter rules Pisces, and Jupiter is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint, and Mercury-Mars as a pair are very verbal. I was telling this to Sagittarius, because Sagittarius also has Jupiter as its ruler. And I was saying to Sagittarius that Jupiter on a Mercury-Mars midpoint means that one can express oneself actually with a certain amount of violence, but I don't mean violence in a particularly negative way. It's more about how you assert yourself with force, and you can forcibly express yourself, provided the circumstances are right. In many cases, it's not the right time to express yourself with force. You've got to ask yourself, is it important? To what extent do you actually need to be heard? And if you need to be heard, then Pisces, make sure you are heard, and I think that you will be heard. I should also mention relationships and just the people you interact with today. And Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. Virgo is your opposite sign. And so Mercury says a lot about relationships and the people you meet. And Mercury at the moment is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And this means that today you may be interacting with people who are attractive and charismatic and maybe very persuasive. Now, that can be a good or a bad thing. It kind of depends on the situation. You could be vulnerable to manipulation with this Mercury on Venus-Mars midpoint. So you get close to someone, and once you get close to someone, they're able to sort of work their magic on you, and they can persuade you to do things that you actually weren't planning on doing. So do consider your interactions with people. And if you meet someone who is charismatic and you don't know them and you don't know what they want, or perhaps they're trying to sell you something, be very careful. On the other hand, if you're mixing with people you know very well, then you will be, I think, charmed and enriched by their presence. People do, the right person, someone you feel confident with and you trust, they are going to be extra charming and perhaps extra attractive, and you can really benefit from their company. So this Mercury on the Venus-Mars midpoint, it kind of depends on the situation. In most cases, actually, I think it's quite a good thing rather than a bad thing. But just be very wary of attractive strangers. And that is it with my readings for the 12 signs. And what I want to do now is look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 17, which is following. And this is a hexagram where we need to consider what impact we're having on other people. And there are people who may be following us, who perhaps find us attractive, remembering that today Mercury is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So it's all about who is following who. It may be we are following someone else because they are charismatic or attractive, or perhaps someone is following us because we are apparently charismatic and attractive. And so that relationship with other people does need to be carefully considered. And we do get some further detail about this hexagram following through the bottom line and the second from a bottom line, i.e. the first and the second lines, because in both cases they change. So the bottom line breaks, and with the bottom line breaking, we may become aware as we interact with people, as people are perhaps vying for control, who's following who, that actually there are differences of opinion. And these differences of opinion are probably quite difficult to resolve, and it may actually be that there are winners and losers, and perhaps because of the differences of opinion, our attempts to attract people may diminish, because people are perhaps questioning, do we really know what we're talking about? So we might say something and someone says, well, actually no, that's not right. Even if you occupy a position of authority, when you try to exert your authority, there may be questions about whether you really know what you're doing. I'm not saying whether those questions are legitimate. It's just something to be aware of. Then the second line moves. And the second line moves, here we've got the real question about choosing our friends. We have to choose the right friends and choosing who we hang out with. If we follow the line of least resistance and we just associate with people who it's easiest to associate with, perhaps because they're available, then I think we might be moved in the wrong direction. We have to make sure that we're associating with people who are good for us, who are up to the task, whatever that task might be, and we do need to make that distinction. And even then, it might be difficult to, if you like, get the right set of followers. So following is what we need, but are we actually going to be able to pull it off? And I think these kind of issues are reflected in the next hexagram, which is hexagram 47, which is oppression. And we find ourselves in a situation, we've just had to deal with lots of different pressures, who's following who, and now we're in a situation where we've actually got a lot to deal with, and it's not fun. We've got a lot on our plate, and we're going to be worried about whether or not we're going to make it. We are going to make it. It's okay, but we just have this big burden on our back. It's a lot to carry, and perhaps we're having to carry more than we wanted because other people have not been able to keep their promises. They've not been up to the task, and so it's just been us that's just had to fill in, and we just had to take the strain. And I know that's not a great way to end the day, but what I will say is that, yes, I believe you can carry this burden in a symbolic way. I don't know. I'm not talking about anything physical. Don't lift heavy weights and don't feel that you can carry a huge sack of something or some heavy piece of furniture just because I've said that you can handle it. No, you've got to be realistic there. In general, you've got to be sensible there. But whatever burden you find yourself you've been left with, don't panic, because I do think that you can, in the end, you can manage it. Sorry to have such a negative I Ching, but just remember this I Ching is just for today. And tomorrow is likely to be very different. So turning to Pluto. Pluto is now stationary retrograde. And this is the chart for that moment when Pluto goes retrograde. And I've gone for May the 2nd, 2024 at 6:43 p.m. I've set this chart for Westminster in London, just because it's most convenient to do that. And there is Pluto at 2 degrees 6 Aquarius. And so what happens is Pluto starts to go backwards from a perspective of the Earth. And it continues going backwards until it goes stationary direct. And it goes stationary direct on October the 12th. So that's May, June, July, August, September, October. So it's basically going retrograde for 5 months. And while it's retrograde on September the 2nd, it actually goes back into Capricorn and keeps going retrograde until October the 12th. Until October the 12th, when it goes stationary. And it goes stationary at 29:39 Capricorn. So we've got from September the 2nd through to October the 12th. So that's, 5 or 6 weeks where Pluto is in Capricorn. And then goes direct. And then on November the 19th, Pluto finally goes back into Aquarius, or rather goes forward into Aquarius. So that means, for example, that the US presidential elections, November the 5th, happen when Pluto is in Capricorn. So the question is, what does it mean when Pluto goes retrograde? Well, I think in many respects it could be about returning to things that we thought we had dealt with. We thought we'd understood what changes are happening in our world, and we're ready to embrace the future. We're getting used to Pluto being in Aquarius, but not quite. Pluto going into Capricorn may revisit things that we thought were over, perhaps things we thought we dealt with last year. No, we haven't quite dealt with them. And it's not just us, it's society at large. And I think that is actually interesting from a presidential election, because the presidential election is supposed to be about the future. It's about preparing for the future, the president who can deal with the challenges of the future. Yet that actual election is happening when Pluto is in Capricorn. So in a way, people are going to be voting for the US president from a perspective of the past, of the old way of doing things, the old way of seeing the world, rather from the perspective of the future. So that might mean that whoever gets elected in November is someone who is not suited for the times in which they are going to have to be president. I need to give that concept more thought, and I'd perhaps invite you to give that concept more thought. So don't think that it's all done and dusted. We completely get used to Pluto in Aquarius. We do. There are some things from the past we have to deal with. And I think the presidential election, I think it's kind of unfortunate that the election happens while Pluto is in Capricorn, because that might mean that, whoever is elected might be someone who is inappropriate. Then we have the question with Pluto going retrograde. Who is going to be affected? Let's look at this chart, for example. This is the chart for Pluto going retrograde. I've set it for Westminster in England. Westminster is a part of London where all the government has a parliament. So that's why I've set it for Westminster. Not that it's going to make a big deal of difference whether I set it for Westminster or some other part of London. But if you set that chart for Westminster, you can't help but notice that Pluto is exactly on the IC. And I talked about this before, so I don't want to spend very, very long on it, particularly as I'm to an extent repeating myself. But May the 2nd in the UK, there are council elections. And so Pluto is going stationary retrograde on the day of council elections. And Pluto is exactly on the IC in London. Council elections and also there are elections for the mayor of London. I believe that Sadiq Khan, the current mayor of London, I'm not going to try to use astrology to predict whether or not he's going to win, because I believe, according to the betting sites, that his chances of winning are something like 95%. So I'm not going to bother making any predictions about who's going to win the mayoral election. But Pluto is on the IC, and so you think about Sadiq Khan and London government. Pluto on the IC on election day, that's not good. Specifically impacting London, it's going to be really difficult the next few years for London with that chart on the election chart. With that chart on the day of the elections, not good at all. And I think it also says something about the UK with Pluto on the IC. There are clearly big changes happening in the UK. You don't need to be an astrologer to tell that. The government, the Conservative government, has, as I understand it, has no chance of winning. Again, I'm not saying that from the perspective of astrology. Every political commenter in the UK says that the government is going to lose whenever that election happens, and Labour is going to win, and that's going to create huge fault lines. It's going to create real struggle. So we can see from that chart, I think, that the UK is moving into a very difficult and traumatic period. I know it's already difficult and traumatic, but I think that chart really emphasizes the point that it's really not going to get any better. And one thing about Pluto going retrograde, when you look at the chart for Pluto going retrograde, you need to look at the condition of Pluto. And you'll see that Pluto is semi-square Saturn. So that's what we've got at the moment. So Pluto semi-square Saturn, it's not just about London or the UK, it's about the whole world when Pluto goes retrograde. Pluto Saturn is about really a huge struggle. A struggle for power, a struggle for dominance, people trying to assert themselves, people trying to assert control, people feeling that they're really hemmed in, governments out of control, governments really trying to establish their authority. But at the same time, it can be a bit rebellious, Pluto semi-square Saturn, people trying to do anything they can to break free from whatever straitjacket they feel themselves to be in. And yeah, I do think that is pretty difficult. And I think that Pluto going retrograde in the world is likely to be problematic wherever you are. Let me just do astrocartography on this, just to consider places which might be impacted. Again, I've done this before, but Pluto is going stationary retrograde. I think I should consider all of this. So there is that. See that red line going through England and Spain. Now, I have not been following Spanish politics, but I've had some commenters who have mentioned Spain, and I did kind of mention Spain in some previous videos, I think sort of a week ago. There are sort of lines going through Spain, and you can see that this line actually goes through Madrid. Now, I understand that there is a corruption scandal in Spain, which is undermining a government. I have not been following Spanish politics at all. I do not know what's going on in Spain, but I understand that there are big things happening politically in Spain. And so if you set the Pluto retrograde chart for Madrid, you're going to see Pluto on the IC, and you're going to see Pluto semi-square Saturn, as you do in the UK. Now let's follow this line down, and we can see that there are a couple of places in Western Africa that get hit by this line. So we shouldn't be completely Eurocentric. I think that this Pluto going retrograde could impact West Africa. Where else in the world? Pluto, any other Pluto Aquarius lines? Well, there's some kind of Pluto. There's a Pluto opposition, the ascendant line going through sort of Mexico and going through southern Chile, southern Argentina. It doesn't go through Buenos Aires, so I know that we've got Milei is trying all sorts of stuff economically in Argentina, but I'm not convinced this Pluto retrograde is necessarily going to impact Argentina specifically, because the line doesn't go through Buenos Aires, the seat of government. Anywhere else, I think that is the main point. I think that this Moon Pluto is really going to have an impact. Yeah, the countries that come to mind are Spain and the UK. Now, this raises the question to me: does it really work? Can we really look at Pluto going retrograde and say, well, or Pluto going direct? When Pluto goes stationary direct or stationary retrograde, does it actually mean anything? And so what I thought I'd do is I just have a brief look at what's going on historically. You know, I'm into history, and maybe you're not, but let's look at a time when Pluto went stationary direct. Here is Pluto going stationary direct on April the 12th, 1939. In other words, this was a Pluto stationary the Pluto station immediately before the start of the Second World War from a European perspective. I understand if you're in America, the Second World War didn't start until Pearl Harbor, but from a European perspective, this is Pluto direct just before the start of the start of World War II. Now, this is set for Westminster. I mean, fair enough. I mean, England declared war on September the 3rd. What does this chart look like? Well, there is an exact Sun-Saturn conjunction in Aries. That is true. And so that might suggest that it is a somewhat difficult time. So you could say that. Venus in Pisces on a descendant. Does Venus in Pisces on a descendant mean war? Not immediately, although there is a view that Venus can be associated with, I believe, Nike, the Greek god of victory. So I suppose Venus does actually have a warlike feeling that people don't really talk about. But if you look at certain mythologies, you could associate Venus with war. But that is really very after the event, and I wouldn't want to read too much into that. Pluto, yeah, you see Pluto's 29 Cancer, just going into Cancer. I mean, it just about going into Leo, but I would not have said that chart in itself was particularly dramatic. But then if you think about the Second World War, who do you most associate the Second World War with? Well, I suppose you've got to say, well, you most associate the Second World War with Adolf Hitler. How would this affect him? So why don't we relocate this chart for the place that Adolf Hitler was born in? So let's relocate it to Braunau and Braunau in Austria. So that is a better picture. So this is perhaps how Pluto is occurring to the Pluto retrograde was perhaps affecting Hitler. Jupiter is actually now on a descendant opposition Neptune. And so you could see, if you are a dictator of Germany, that you could see that Jupiter opposition Neptune may be having an impact now on him. And now that Sun-Saturn conjunction in the 8th house, again, Pluto in itself is not directly impacted, but you could say, well, the moon is opposition Pluto, so perhaps something is going on there. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that for sure, but I'm just experimenting. I'm just playing here. So that's the beginning of the Second World War. What about the end of the Second World War? there was a Pluto station on Pluto went stationary direct in 1945 and set for Westminster. Pluto went stationary direct on April the 20th, 1945, which was Hitler's birthday. I think that is quite spectacular in its own way. You think about it, Hitler's solar return, Pluto went stationary direct. I mean, that seems to be good. I mean, that seems to be exactly what you would expect. And I think that raises the issue about what does it actually mean for Hitler. So I've set that for Westminster. So maybe I should set this for where Hitler was born. I mean, that seems to be absolutely reasonable. So let me just set that for so if you set the moment for when Pluto went stationary direct to Braunau, which is Hitler's birthplace, you then see that Pluto is pretty close on his ascendant, and so I think that might be an indication that this is kind of working. So this might be a predictive technique. So if you know the time that a planet is going stationary direct or stationary retrograde, you reset it for someone's place of birth, particularly if they're a famous person like a politician. You reset it for their place of birth and see if something important comes up. And this Pluto direct on April the 20th, you could say, well, okay, it coincided with Hitler dying, it coincided with the end of the Second World War. It also coincided with the beginning of the nuclear age. And I suppose you could say that someone who's very much associated with the beginning of the nuclear age is Robert Oppenheimer. And here's Robert Oppenheimer's chart. So Robert Oppenheimer was born on April the 22nd, 1904, different year from Hitler, but he was born 2 days after Hitler. And so at his solar return for April the 22nd, he would have had Pluto going stationary direct. And of course, Pluto rules the element plutonium. And of course, the first nuclear weapon was a plutonium device. And we can relocate the Pluto. This is the Pluto going direct on April the 20th, 1945, relocated for New York. And notice that the ascendant is 1 degree 37 Taurus, and his sun exactly rising. Now you could say sun exactly rising. This represents American victory. Sun rising in Aries, but okay. The actual ascendant was Taurus, but a sunrise chart. This is a new beginning for America. So again, if you're trying to work out where Pluto direct, Pluto retrograde is going to work, perhaps reset it for different places. But New York this is the birthplace of Robert Oppenheimer. And just to compare that chart with Robert Oppenheimer's chart. So Robert Oppenheimer has his sun at 0 degrees 58 Taurus, and the ascendant was at 1 degree 37 Taurus. So that ascendant was really exactly on his sun. So I think we can see a sense in which Pluto retrogrades and directs can have an impact on people, particularly if they're famous people. I'm not quite sure how they work for just ordinary people, but for people like Hitler or Robert Oppenheimer and so forth, they may be something that really needs to be considered. One thing I should point out, going back to the 1939 chart set for Braunau and in is the position of Uranus. Look at how Uranus is at 16 degrees 19 Taurus. Let's compare that with 1619. Uranus is at 1619 Taurus. So if you compare that with Hitler's chart, I think I've got Hitler's chart somewhere here. There's Hitler's chart, and if we the 1939 chart. I have got so many things open, it's just a bit of a problem. But anyway, Hitler's chart has his Mars. Hitler's Mars is at 16 Taurus. So Hitler's Mars is at 16 Taurus. Uranus, at the time of Pluto going stationary direct, was at on April 12, 1939. Uranus was at 16, also at 16 Taurus. So at the time of that stationary direct, Uranus was exactly on his Mars. So, of course, he was a man who initiated the war. So again, that does seem to work quite well. I wanted to look at two more stationary examples of Pluto going stationary direct, and I want to consider Pluto going stationary direct on May the 21st, 1963. So this was, and I've set it for Brookline, Massachusetts, which is where John F. Kennedy was born. And so this is the Pluto going direct immediately before John F. Kennedy was assassinated. He was assassinated on November the 22nd. So, it was 6 months before he was assassinated, but this is the previous Pluto going direct. Again, reset for John F. Kennedy's birthplace. And, well, I don't really have to explain much, do I? Mars is rising, and Saturn is on the descendant, and Mercury is at 24 Taurus, close to Algol, and that says it all, doesn't it? Mars opposition Saturn is about death, and that presages the death of a president. And I think that is perhaps the most powerful chart that really does indicate that if you want to know about famous people, particularly like presidents, dictators, whenever Pluto goes direct or retrograde, set up a chart for the event and set it for the place of their birth, and you really might see something interesting. Finally, the final one I want to look at is Pluto going direct immediately prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So this invasion happened end of February 2022. So the previous Pluto station was on October the 6th, 2021. Okay, this is set for Westminster, but you can see, I don't know, set for Westminster, Pluto was on the midheaven, but this wasn't really affecting England, it was affecting Russia, so perhaps we should relocate this chart to Moscow. So let's set that for Moscow in Russia, obviously. So that's the invasion of Ukraine set for Moscow. Do we see anything of any great interest? I don't know, I'm not convinced. Jupiter's on the midheaven. I mean, okay, kind of, not exactly there. But I don't think that's a very impressive chart. But who do we associate with the invasion of Ukraine? Well, of course, we associate Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. Now, I think that people in the West completely overestimate Putin's role in the invasion. I think if any other Russian leader had been in charge, whether it had been a czar, president, general secretary of a communist party, they would be doing the same thing. So I think we shouldn't personalize it, but still, Russia's president is Putin. So let us consider this Pluto return relative to Vladimir Putin's horoscope. So Vladimir Putin, this is his chart. We don't have a time of birth for Vladimir Putin, which is kind of annoying. I know a lot of people say he was born 9:30 in the evening, but I think so. But I don't see a confirmed time of birth for him on astro.com. So I'm going to still stick with the noon chart. And so here is Vladimir Putin's chart. And we'll notice that he was born on October the 7th, 1952. Now, critics of Vladimir Putin would probably be very happy the fact that though Pluto went direct on Hitler's birthday in 1945, just before he committed suicide, Pluto went direct on October the 6th, 2021, just before Putin's birthday. And if we compare Vladimir Putin's chart in the middle with Pluto, with the positions of the planets when Pluto went direct, you can see, well, the Sun conjunct Sun, it was indeed his solar return. Mars was at 1411 Libra, again, right on Putin's Sun. And the Moon was at 1753, right on Putin's Saturn. And Mercury was at 19 Libra, hitting Putin's Neptune. Pluto itself wasn't really aspecting anything in Pluto's chart, but that doesn't matter because we're looking at the overall chart. So I think looking at Putin's chart and the Pluto direct chart, this again really emphasizes the point. What you do is you set up a chart for Pluto going direct or Pluto going retrograde, and then you compare it with compare it with important people. Now, given the fact that one final point, given the fact that Pluto went direct in October on April the 20th, which was very close to Robert Oppenheimer's birthday, very close to Hitler's birthday, and also Pluto went direct just before the Russian invasion, very close to Putin's birthday. Maybe this means that if you have a birthday within, say, 10 days of Pluto going direct or retrograde, maybe this is going to be a very important year. So that's just a thought. Okay, I have gone on far too long about Pluto going direct and retrograde. I've probably put up far too many charts as well, and you're probably completely lost by now. And if you're still listening to me, then I think you're going to be very relieved that I'm finally going to end this video. So thank you very much for listening to this. I hope you were able to get through it. I suppose if you're still listening to me, you did get through it. If you did happen to enjoy it, then I would be very grateful if you were to like this video. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed it, then feel free to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.